between two sort of opposing arguments. One, they want someone who can deliver Brexit, but two, they surely want an end to the low slong, hard slog and a bit of sort of sunlight over the horizon who can deliver.
Okay, Norman, thank you very much. As we get close to the result of the latest ballot, do stay with us on the BBC News channel for all the latest on the Tory leadership race. We'll be bringing you live coverage of those final 2 rounds of voting throughout the day, with the results expected at 1 p.m. and then later on at 6 p.m. The leader of the Roman Catholic Church in England and Wales, Cardinal Vincent Nichols, has been accused of defending the reputation of the Church rather than focusing on the impact of child sexual abuse on victims. The accusation comes from the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse following an investigation into the Archdiocese of Birmingham, where the Cardinal was Archbishop from 2000 to 2009. Let's hear more now from our correspondent Sarah Walton, who's outside that inquiry, the building where that inquiry is taking place. Sarah, here's the damning line. Children could have been saved from abuse if the Church had not been so determined to protect its own reputation above all else. Tell us more about what's been said.
Yes, that's right. It's one of the findings made in this report published this lunchtime, and it essentially finds that since the mid-1930s, over 130 allegations of child sexual abuse have been made against 78 individuals associated with the Archdiocese of Birmingham. It also finds failings in the Church's response to allegations made against several priests, including one priest who was helped to flee the country and evade prosecution for 25 years. Now, Cardinal Vincent Nichols is now the Archbishop of Westminster, the most senior figure in the Roman Catholic Church in England and Wales. But between 2000 and 2009, he was the Archbishop of Westminster. And the report found, as you said, that in his time there, he focused too much on the reputation of the Church rather than the welfare of children and the impacts of child sexual abuse on victims and survivors. It also says that the Archdiocese is still failing in its child safeguarding arrangements. Now, the chair of the inquiry, Professor Alexis Jay, has been scathing in his remarks today. He says that it's clear that the Church could have stopped children being abused if it had not been so determined to protect its own reputation. Now, we've had no response from Cardinal Nichols, but this is more strong criticism today of the Catholic Church, which has already faced allegations of serious failings in recent years.
Sarah, thank you very much. Sarah Walton reporting. The black cab rapist John Worboys has pleaded guilty to drugging 4 more women so he could sexually assault them. Worboys, who now goes by the name of John Radford, was jailed in 2009 for a series of sexual assaults, and a decision 2 years ago to release him was reversed after a public outcry. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent Danny Shaw speaking from outside the Old Bailey.
John Worboys, or John Radford as he was referred to at court at the Old Bailey, appeared via video link from Wakefield Prison, and he answered guilty 4 times when these new charges were put to him. He pleaded guilty to these 4 counts of supplying drugs to women with the intention of sexually assaulting them. The offences took place between 2000 and 2008, so quite a broad period of offending, and that is significant because previously John Worboys has said that his offending was limited to a short 18-month period, and it was on that basis that the parole board decided that it was safe for him to be released back at the end of 2017, because they said that he had admitted his offending, he'd taken responsibility and been open and honest. Well, what these convictions demonstrate today is that he had not been honest, because this offending predates that 18-month period. Certainly some of it does. In terms of sentencing, that has been adjourned until the beginning of September, because the judge was quite clear that she wanted a probation report to be compiled that would take into account much of the material that the parole board has accumulated over the years about John Worboys. In the meantime, he remains at Wakefield Prison. The key question, I suppose, for the judge in sentencing is whether or not this term of imprisonment that he has at the moment, an indefinite term, should be substituted for one of life imprisonment, a life sentence, and whether the minimum term that was imposed, an 8-year minimum term, should be extended. But those are questions for the judge in September.
Danny Shaw reporting. Campaigners have won a legal challenge against the government over British arms sales to Saudi Arabia. The appeal court said the government hadn't done enough to assess whether the Saudi authorities had breached international law by their military campaign in Yemen. The ruling has temporarily blocked future licences from being granted, but said current sales could continue. Theresa May said she was disappointed with the judgment and that the government is seeking permission to appeal. Our Global Affairs correspondent Naomi Grimley was outside the Court of Appeal as the result came in.
UK export policy is very clear. It says arms sales are illegal if there is, quote, a clear risk that that equipment might be used in the serious violations of international humanitarian law. Now, this case looked at whether the UK government was properly taking into account what was going on the ground in Yemen. Of course, there's been lots of criticism that Saudi Arabia has been persecuting airstrikes without properly checking that civilians are not going to be in the line of fire. Well, the judges said that although the UK government had taken into account some of that, they hadn't actually launched a proper systematic assessment of past violations of humanitarian law by the Saudis in Yemen. And because they didn't go about it in the right way with the right process, these three Court of Appeal judges have ruled that the current export licensing regime is indeed illegal.
And Naomi, I don't know if you've just heard, we're just hearing the Department for Trade saying it's seeking leave to appeal this decision.
Indeed, they've made the point that this is about the process, essentially, and that they will try and seek leave to appeal against it. Now, it's worth just pointing out what will happen now. There can be no future export licences now issued by the Department for Trade because the process has been proved to be illegal. But existing licences can continue. However, the Secretary of State is now going to have to look at all of those past licences. So a review of existing and past licences and future licences put on hold for now.
Naomi Grimley. And staying with the courts, a man found guilty of killing a woman in a speedboat crash has lost his appeal against his conviction for manslaughter. Jack Shepherd's lawyers had argued the conviction was unsafe as he wasn't cautioned or offered a solicitor by police. He was jailed for 6 years for the death of Charlotte Brown, who was thrown from his boat when it capsized on the River Thames in December 2015. An age check scheme designed to stop under-18s viewing pornographic websites has been delayed for 6 months due to an administrative error. The controversial changes, which require users to verify their age using personal identification, was due to come into effect next month after already being delayed from April last year. The Culture Secretary Jeremy Wright has told the Commons that due to an oversight, the EU Commission hadn't been notified correctly. The rate at which Himalayan glaciers are melting has doubled in recent years. Scientists from Columbia University in New York used spy satellite pictures from the Cold War era to show that ice loss in the region has doubled over the last 40 years. They compared those images to more recent images. The research is published in the journal Science Advances. Ice loss from glaciers is important because it contributes to rising sea levels. Well, voting in the Conservative leadership race has closed. The results are expected in the next hour. Let's cross now to a special edition of Politics Live with Andrew Neil.
The field of MPs seeking to become the next Conservative leader and Prime Minister is down to just 4. By the end of today, it will be narrowed to the final 2. Boris Johnson looks set to cruise onto the shortlist and is the favourite to win when party members have their say. The race to decide who will challenge him looks too close to call. It's Thursday. It's 12:15. We're live in Westminster. Joining me today, Conservative Home's executive editor Mark Wallace, the Westminster correspondent for the Yorkshire Post, Liz Bates, the Liberal Democrat MP, Chuka Umunna, and the Brexit Party MEP, Anne Widdecombe. Today, this man, Boris Johnson, already has the support of almost half the parliamentary party. That leaves only one place left to fight for.
I'm looking forward to making it through to the final two and looking forward to a civilised debate of ideas.
I'm sure I will be picking up some votes, but these things can be unpredictable, so I want to go for it.
May the best man win, and that's going to be me.
Barring an upset, we expect that challenger to be Jeremy Hunt or Michael Gove. We'll be live in this room in the House of Commons at 1 p.m. to bring you the results of the latest ballot in this Conservative leadership race. So, we're pretty sure Mr. Johnson goes forward to the final two. We're not yet sure who'll be with him. We'll know by the end of today. Let's find out who you think. Anne Widdecombe, who will be the second?
I would have imagined it'd probably be Jeremy Hunt.
OK. Chuka Umunna?
I think it will be Michael Gove.
Ah. Liz?
I'm going to say Jeremy Hunt.
OK.
Michael Gove would be my guess.
So, two each.
Two each.
A decider. Shall I have a guess?
You have the casting vote.
Go on.
Probably Jeremy Hunt. The one thing that makes me wonder about that, though, is that I think a lot of Tory MPs who want Mr. Johnson to have more of a run for his money think that Michael Gove would give him more of a run for his money than Jeremy Hunt.
I think that's right. I mean, look, I think it is extraordinary that we are in this position and that Boris Johnson is on the cusp of becoming the Prime Minister of our country. You have seen the comments of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's husband about the adverse impact he had on her position. He, I think by common consensus, has been one of the worst foreign secretaries ever. But if you look at the various different comments that he has made, the racist comments this guy has made, describing black people as pickaninnies, having watermelon smiles, describing Muslim women as looking like letterboxes, and that
But people know all that.
But it doesn't matter.
And he would say these are all
matter.
taken out of context.
You can say people know all about that, but that's the problem, is this guy becoming leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister of our country basically normalises coming out with that kind of racist hatred.
All right, hold on. We're going to have a Boris Johnson supporter joining us quite shortly, and you can put these points to him, and they can answer for him. Let's, though, go now to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. He's in Central Lobby. Norman, you can see the debate's already kicked off here endlessly. I feel like Groundhog Day when I hear all this sometimes. But let me ask you this. Talk us through what is going to happen today.
Well, we will get the result of the latest ballot round about, I would think, 5 minutes past 1. And so one candidate, the bottom candidate, will be eliminated regardless of how many votes they get. There's no threshold they have to get over. We'll then be down to 3 remaining candidates. MPs can then go away, have a bite to eat, take a walk around the block, whatever. Voting resumes again at 3:30 and runs until 5:30. The result will be a little bit later, so about 6:15. Charles Walker, Vice Chairman of the 22, will get up. He, incidentally, is the only man who knows who Mrs May has voted for, because he has been given Mrs May's proxy vote. He will get up and he will announce another person who's going to be knocked out, which will, of course, leave us with the final 2 candidates to go to the country, and we will learn who it is going to take on Boris Johnson in that final ballot.
So by 6 o'clock tonight, or thereabouts, Norman, the British people will know which one of 2 people is going to be our next Prime Minister.
They'll know who is going to have to go round the country in the next month or so, all the different parts of the country. I think doing something like 12 different hustings for Tory party members over June and July. So that's an awful lot of hustings. It's, 3-4 hustings a week. And that will run on until, I think, July 22, 5 o'clock, which is the last time you can vote. Now, we don't exactly know when the result will be announced, but my guess is the party will not want to sit on the result. They won't want it to leak. So my best guess is we would get the result of who the next Prime Minister is going to be the next day on July 23rd, the Tuesday. But that is just a guess.
Norman, thank you very much. Busy day for you, busy day for all of us. Thanks for talking to us. Mark Wallace, does it matter who the second candidate going forward is?
I think it does for two reasons. The first is, as Boris Johnson of all people can tell you, is no race or no election of any sort is completely sealed until you actually know the result. You never quite know what's going to happen. Yes, he's obviously the strong favourite, but even if you take the assumption that that favourite status will win through in the end, who goes through to the final two affects what kind of debate this is going to be for the next few weeks, and that'll be in the mind of former Rory Stewart supporting MPs in particular. Are you out for someone who you think will be the potential strongest challenger in terms of the votes they could win, or are you out for somebody who might do the most damage to Boris Johnson, even if he goes on to become Prime Minister?
Did Rory Stewart, he was knocked out yesterday, he's the latest one to have been knocked out. Did he, was what he did a media distraction, or has he changed the shape of the campaign?
I mean, I think he certainly livened it up a little bit for all of us that were covering the campaign. I mean, the way that he sort of approached it was very different from the way a lot of the Tory leadership candidates did, especially in terms of Boris Johnson, who hid, and Rory was out there talking to people. I think he kind of reinvigorated the political scene a little bit, and he did make that case for centrist politics and do that quite effectively.
He seemed to be most popular with people that didn't have a vote in this contest.
He did, and I'm sure that Chuka can sort of understand that position.
Had the same issue in the 2015 Labour leadership election. There were a lot of people outside of the Labour Party who thought she would be by far the best candidate.
What did you make of the Rory Stewart campaign then?
Well, I thought it was interesting because he introduced a degree of choice, that he was saying something completely different. And from that point of view, I think he added interest to the debate. I never thought he was going to survive for very long, because I don't think that what he was saying necessarily resonated with the electorate that he was addressing, which were Conservative MPs. But I thought he did bring interest, and I mean, I'm all for choice, even where I strongly disagree with somebody, and at least
he was different.
It sparks a debate.
Indeed.
What's wrong with debate?
I think that's why he grabbed the media's attention too, because it was different. Let's welcome the Conservative MP, Damian Collins. He's supporting Boris Johnson. Damian Collins, welcome to the programme. There's quite a lot of talk of skullduggery at this stage of the race, of votes being lent here and there. I mean, the front page of the Telegraph this morning says, Johnson hatches plot to knock out Gove. Tory frontrunner supporters could vote tactically as they hope for Hunt in the final two. Is that true?
No, it's not true. Firstly, I don't think it matters who the number two is.
And Widdicombe's laughing there, by the way.
She's entitled to.
She's seen a few Tory.
She's seen more leadership elections than I have. I don't know what it was like in the old days, but look, I don't think it matters necessarily who comes second. I think they're all very experienced cabinet ministers, and they've got different qualities. They will all, I think, be part of a leadership debate which is full of challenge and inquiry.
But which one does Mr. Johnson fear the most?
I don't think he fears any of them.
But he must have a view that one would be tougher than another.
I think what he is doing, and I think what he's best served to do, is concentrate on getting his own supporters through the lobbies to vote for him and not worrying about other people. Ultimately, in any leadership election, you try and win the support of your colleagues, and you try and have a block of people that will vote for you, and you either control those votes or you don't. And if you don't control them, then you've got no real say in what those people will do.
Have you voted for any other candidate in this race?
No, I voted for Boris all the way through.
Right from the start?
Yeah, and
How do we know that?
How do we know? Well,
we don't.
Well, actually, my first vote was cast by proxy because I was on a select committee at the moment. So you could ask by proxy whether he did. I'm taking his word for it that he voted the way I asked him to. But given he's a Boris supporter as well, I'd be surprised if he didn't.
And Widdicombe, tell them why skullduggery happens in Conservative leadership elections.
Oh, because very often candidates do have a view as to who they want eliminated early. And if they are sufficiently far ahead, they will, so to speak, lend their votes tactically to others to ensure that they have the right line-up at the end. It's a very, very common phenomenon in, I'm terribly sorry, Damian, at leadership elections. Now, Andrew asked how we know that you voted for Boris throughout. I know, because I know you to be an honourable man. But that, I'm afraid, is not universal.
Well, I can only speak for myself.
Very well. And for Boris Johnson, which is why you're here today.
Yeah.
Mark Wallace, Conservative Home, you follow these things. Has there been a bit of skullduggery in this campaign?
Well, there's definitely been dreaming of skullduggery at minimum. You've put your finger
What kind of person dreams of skullduggery?
A politician, to start off with. And I think part of the difficulty you've put your finger on is this is a secret ballot of politicians. It's more secretive and, dare I say, sometimes more misleading than even a secret ballot of the general electorate. And that in itself complicates things. I think there's an extra factor, which is even MPs who think they would be really nice to do some cunning wheezers and cunning schemes, they're not necessarily always successful in pulling them off. And they have backfired in the past as well. People have accidentally put through somebody who they thought was a dead cert to beat, only to see, say, Ian Duncan-Smith become leader of the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
Mr Johnson has another supporter this morning. George Osborne, formerly Chancellor of the Exchequer, leading Remainer. This is from his Evening Standard, where he is now the editor. We back Boris Johnson, he says. And in the op-ed, he says that in the editorial endorsing him in the London Evening Standard, ask yourself which of these potential prime ministers is most likely to persuade the Conservative Party to vote for a repacked version of the existing deal. And it goes on to conclude that Boris Johnson is the man. And he also says, or he might allow a second referendum. What do you think of that, Damien?
Well, I don't think the second referendum will happen. I think what Boris has demonstrated, though, and this is why I'm not surprised that he's got George Osborne's endorsement and the endorsement of people like Matt Hancock as well, is that Boris has been able to build a very broad coalition across the Conservative Party to support his campaign. I think people recognise this in many ways as a period of political crisis caused by the fact that Brexit hasn't been delivered when we said it was going to be delivered, and people want a bold, dynamic figure who can get this done.
Who has come out with some grossly offensive things about large portions of our country.
Yeah, I heard what you said earlier, Chucker, about that. I don't think you can caricature someone in that way who could successfully be mayor of one of the most multicultural cities in the world, elected, served for 8 years, who's worked with people from all sorts of backgrounds, endorsed by members of parliament like Alex Sharma and Kwasi Kwarteng. I can't say...
So it's OK for him to come out with flagrantly racist comments among a whole host of other offensive things about large portions of our community. And we just normalise it by seemingly putting him in number 10.
I think people are interested in the big picture. They're interested in the big issues.
Let me tell you something.
No.
As a person
Chucker,
of colour, describing black people as pickaninnies and having watermelon smiles is a big issue.
OK, so let Anne Widdecombe answer.
You've had several goes on this.
No, you can answer.
Can you hear from somebody else? I think what people are interested in is the big issue. And I actually think it will be a step forward if instead of trawling through everybody's past statements to find something that is going to be offensive, you actually concentrate on their ability to deliver and what they're going to be delivered.
All right.
That will be a big step forward in British politics.
Well, let me come on to the...
compared Muslim women
Let me come on to the...
Excuse
me, I'm conducting this debate. Let me come on to the big picture. For Boris Johnson, is Theresa May's withdrawal agreement dead?
Yes.
It's over.
Over. I think that Parliament, Anne's right, Parliament has said so.
So he's going to negotiate a new deal?
So what Boris has said is that the basis of his negotiation will be in support of the only thing the House of Commons has agreed on so far, which is the removal of the backstop provision, so that if there is a transition when we leave, there is an end date or we have the ability to trigger an end date.
That's the May deal with one change. So it's not dead.
Well, no, a very significant change.
Yeah, but one change.
But I think hugely significant because it addresses the issue that the Northern Ireland MPs were so aggrieved about and wouldn't support.
No, I understand that, but you've just completely contradicted yourself. I asked you quite clearly, is the May deal dead? You said, yes, it is. Yeah. And within 10 seconds, you said, well, actually, we'll just make one change to it, and then we'll get it through.
A fundamental change, which completely changes
So it's an amended May deal?
Yeah, but that's totally different from the May deal.
No, it's not. It's one change.
Well, a really important, really significant change.
But Mr Johnson's supporters have been telling the Steve Bakers and hardline ERGs of this world that the May deal is dead.
It is dead.
So he's telling you one thing and he's telling the ERG something else.
Well, no, it's the same thing, because the amendment passed is massively significant.
But it's not dead. I've had Johnson people brief me that he simply wants one change to the withdrawal agreement on the backstop and he'll accept it.
Yeah, but...
So it's the May deal with one amendment is what he wants.
I think we both are looking at this from slightly different perspectives. I think the May deal amended in that way is not the May deal. It's something very, very different.
But if it's only one sentence that's changed, and my understanding is what he wants is to say that in the event of the future negotiations failing to come to any agreement, that the backstop will cease to exist after a certain amount of time. That's the only change I'm told he's looking for.
Well,
so he hopes to get an amended deal through.
If that is not significant, why did the EU reject it?
Yeah, but you know, Andrew, you know why this is so significant because
so he is trying to get the May deal through with one change.
Yeah, but that is not the May deal. We've been talking about this issue, the backstop, for 9 months now.
It is the May deal with one change, I'm afraid.
Help me here.
I mean, Theresa May thought it wasn't her deal, and the EU thought it wasn't the deal they'd signed, because they signed the deal as it was. I think the fact is, if he's keeping some elements of the May deal, that in itself is going to be controversial with Steve Baker.
He's keeping every element of the May deal in this scenario, except the backstop.
Yeah, which was the single issue which has divided the Parliament on the backstop.
So does Steve Baker and the ERG, do they get happy with this?
Yeah,
he's produced a paper that's attacked the withdrawal agreement on about a dozen different fronts.
But if you, Andrew, as you'll remember, this removal of the backstop was also part of the process that was known as the Malthouse Compromise, where people like Steve Baker came together because what they realised was we were no longer binding ourselves into a negotiating process where we could be locked into the customs union or something like it. We could still look at a free trade agreement and aspects of the free trade agreement that people like Steve Baker wanted. We would be keeping our options open during the transition, and that's why they came together to support it, and that's why that amendment got through the House of Commons. This may only be one change. It may sound like a small technical change, but it totally changes the way this process would work afterwards and will lead to a very different outcome.
There's two issues. One is it's highly unlikely that the EU would ever accept the Malthouse Compromise. I met with one of the largest countries yesterday, one of their senior diplomats. That is not going to happen. Secondly, what I think probably will happen is that Johnson will seek to find an excuse for going for an extension, which is quite likely to be granted at least for a few months. And the excuse that will be given will be twofold. One is I think he'll get into government and say, I've arrived and found we're totally not ready to leave without a deal. We need a few more months. And secondly, he will appoint an Attorney General who will do for him what Geoffrey Cox did not do for May and provide some excuse as to why some tweak to the withdrawal agreement or codicil actually does the job that the likes of the ERG want.
Do Boris Johnson's supporters realise that he's trying to do what Damon Collins has said, that he simply wants one change affecting the backstop, an important change, but one change, and it's the rest of the May withdrawal agreement? Do they realise that?
I think some do. I think people are more acutely aware of essentially what you've just said, which is that there's a risk that there are different things being said in different parts of this race. And, for example, Boris Johnson did win, as far as we can gather, the ERG hustings, which was only between him and Dominic Raab, by being effectively seen by the ERG as more firm on a guaranteed exit, deal or no deal, by the 31st of October. It would be fair to say there are some people who are a little unnerved by slightly more vague language since then.
But can I just say as well, it's not just that...
Let me hear from Liz, then I'll come to you. Hold on.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a sense among some people that Boris is saying different things to different people behind closed doors. I think there's also something else going on, which is that people like Damien are projecting their own wishes onto Boris because he's been so absent from the debate. So they're deciding, well, this is what I want for Brexit, so maybe Boris is going to deliver this for me, and then they're just going along that road.
I'm basing it on the things he's said and the things he's written during this campaign, which he's been really clear on what he would seek to renegotiate and what would happen if he didn't.
Well, there's only one thing.
He's left the door open for no deal, Damien.
He did say very, very clearly to the ERG, and he did say very clearly in public at the beginning of all of this, that we'd leave on the 31st of October. Now he's saying it's eminently feasible that we leave on the... Now, which is it? Are we leaving or is it merely feasible?
I think the eminently feasible was talking about eminently feasible to get a renegotiated deal. He believes that is eminently feasible. But if not, we leave at the end of October
without a deal.
Without a deal.
Are you happy with that?
How's it practically going to be possible to do your deal by the end of October? Not least because the presidencies of the different institutions of the EU are changing. The commissioners will be changing. We have the August months, the August weeks ahead, and you're not going to get a new leader until...
But if he only wants one change, and he will probably put it in the words of, I just want one sentence changed. I simply want it to be said that if future partnership negotiations break down, the backstop will not pertain anymore. That's all he'll want. And that can be done in a week. But we don't know the EU is going to go down that road, of course. If they don't, and if the EU sticks to its guns, are you happy to leave on no deal? Are you prepared to leave on no deal on October the 31st?
It's not the outcome. Leaving that deal is not the outcome I sought from the start of this process. But I think now, failure to leave at the end of October, a further extension, I think will ramp up the anger and the tensions in this country now, which has undermined confidence
so you're
in the whole
prepared to
political
leave?
system. I think we have to be prepared to leave. I think we have to say to the EU there will not be an extension. And I think we have to focus minds now to say this process ends on the 31st of October.
And what will Mr Johnson do if Parliament stops you from leaving on October the 31st?
I think Parliament then has a decision it has to make, one way or another, which is, does it wish to revoke Article 50 or does it wish to leave without a deal? I do not believe the House of Commons will vote to revoke Article 50.
No, but it could still vote to stop a deal.
Well, the decision on whether we extend or not is a decision actually made at the European Council by the Prime Minister. It's not actually a decision.
Yes, but we have to ask for
House.
it.
Well, if the Prime Minister and the government make clear they will not seek an extension, and of course it may not even be granted. I mean, President Macron has been very reluctant to grant any extension so far.
We've had some tweets from Steve Baker. Can we just get them up? Are we? Right, we've had some tweets from Steve Baker showing he wants a lot more than just the change in the backstop. Is Mr Johnson agreeing with that?
Well, Boris has set out his objectives in the renegotiation many times. Steve will be aware of that. And then the question is, during the transition period, if we got this renegotiation, which we haven't got so far, if we got that during the transition period, there are all sorts of negotiations then about the nature of our trading relationship, the nature of our future relationship with Europe, that are resolved during the transition.
But Steve Baker, speaking for part of the ERG, of the Tory Brexiteers, says that one of the things he doesn't want, which is in the May agreement, the May withdrawal agreement, is for the ECJ to continue to be the top court with the jurisdiction over the UK during the transition period. Does Mr Johnson want to change that?
Well, I think that would be open for negotiation as we see.
No, but does he want? No, but you can't negotiate unless he wants to change it. Does Mr Johnson want to change that?
Well, I think. That's. I mean, that.
You don't know, do you?
Well, no. I think the negotiation is based on the backstop primarily. Now, whatever else can be discussed, that's.
Does Mr Johnson? Does he accept? Hold on, Anne. I'm trying to get some clarity here.
Well, there isn't any.
Does he accept, or does he not, the continued jurisdiction of the ECJ during a transition period?
Well, during the transition, as set out in the agreement, we will still be members of the single market, until we leave. Now,
so he does accept that?
Well, that is the rules as they establish.
No, I'm not asking you what the rules are. I'm well aware. I know what the rules are because I've read the rules. What I'm asking you is, does Mr Johnson want to change the rules? Or does he go along with Steve Baker, saying we can't have the ECJ rule? A pretty hard ask, I would think, because they're not going to agree if we're still within the single market. But let me put that to the side. Or does Mr Johnson, as part of the negotiation, want to change that too?
Well, the principal objective is on the backstop. And whatever is renegotiated, then Boris will still have to get the House and the party to agree to that anyway.
No, I understand that, but that's the process. What I'm trying to do is establish the principle. So you said that Mr Johnson has laid out his renegotiation plan for a next round of negotiations if he becomes Prime Minister. Other than trying to get a change to the backstop, what else is in that plan?
For the renegotiation?
Yes.
Well, that is the main objective, because...
So it's not a plan, it's one point.
Well, no, because the point Boris has made is that if you look at what has the House of Commons agreed to so far, what is the basis of getting an agreement through? The basis of getting it through is the Malthouse Compromise, the Brady Amendment, which was about removing the backstop so that we can transition to a free trade agreement with the EU.
Hold on. You said that Mr Johnson had clearly laid out his negotiating plan. And I'm asking you what is in that plan. And other than changing the backstop, there is no plan.
Well, that is, as I said, the key aspect of the plan.
Well, it's the only aspect.
Well, but it's very, as I said at the beginning, I think it's a very fundamentally important
one. Well, if it's the key aspect, logically, there must be other aspects for one to be key, unless it's the only one, and therefore, by definition, it's key. If it's the key aspect, what are the other aspects of his renegotiation plan?
Well, it is based on that objective, which is removed with the backstop provisions, so that we could have an open discussion on transition and not be bound by potential membership of the Customs Union for a prolonged period of time. And that is something that I think there's been a consensus of in the Conservative Party for some time now as the key change that we wanted. Now, as Steve Baker has said, there will be people that have got other views on things they would like as part of that negotiation as well, and we will have to get behind whatever comes. And it may well be that we have to make a decision that if we've been successful in some things, like getting rid of the backstop, but not in others, we'll have to decide whether that is good or good enough.
But I still don't, I mean, we're coming to the end. I still don't know. More important, I don't think our viewers know whether Mr. Boris Johnson is going to ask for anything more than a change to the backstop.
But I think that where we differ is I think that changes fundamentally the nature of the transition period.
I'm not arguing about the importance of it. I'm simply saying it's a one-trick pony. That's the plan. It's a one-trick pony.
But if he doesn't get it, he'll leave without a deal.
Yes, exactly.
All right.
When did you change your mind on that, Damien? Because you said on no deal. Because you've said before that that would be a terrible thing to do and that Parliament should stop it.
Because I think we have to look at what's happened, the consequences of this process being elongated, the impact that has had, and therefore the risk for me is great. The risk of running this process for another year is much greater than the risk of leaving without a deal.
So when did that change?
Well, for me,
when you decided to support Boris Johnson?
I made that decision before. That was one of the reasons I supported Boris Johnson, because I believed that we had to bring this process to a close.
All right.
The risks of not doing that are greater than the potential risks of a no-deal Brexit.
Didn't you change your mind when the Brexit Party started topping the polls?
No, it
wasn't it then?
No, it wasn't then.
Damien.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't then, because I think we could see. I think most MPs can see that this has caused a lot of anger, and the consequence of this is an undermining in our whole political system and in Parliament. People from Parliament's not working for them. We have to deal with that.
I have to deal with this too. We've run out of time. Damien Collins, we'll let you want to be over there for the next result. It's going to be coming out. Let me see. Just under 20 minutes now. We'll get it. Damien Collins, thank you for being with us here. Let's talk about Chuka Umunna now and his political journey. 3 different parties in almost as many months. You're now in the Lib Dems. We've been on air now for half an hour. You're still in the Lib Dems?
I'm still in the Lib Dems.
That must be the longest time for quite a while you've stayed in a party.
Yes.
For over half an hour.
I thought you might put it this way.
Who will you be backing to be your leader?
I'm not backing either of the 2 excellent candidates in the contest. No, well, as it happens, I've joined after the freeze date, the point at which you have to have been a member in order to be able to vote. And I kind of thought, given I joined the party a week ago today, it'd be a bit untoward to start coming in and dictating.
But you're already the Treasury spokesman.
Well, I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting to be asked to do that. But look,
So surely the Lib Dem Treasury spokesman must have a view on who your next leader should be.
As it happens, I don't. And I will work with whoever wins the contest.
Well, of course,
I think they're both great candidates.
Unless you leave and make it 4, obviously you're going to have to work with whoever the leader is.
I won't be doing that.
You must have a view, whether it's, I think it's Joe Swinson and Ed Davey. Help me out, these are the 2 candidates. You see, the old brain's not quite gone yet.
I'm not endorsing.
Which one has more appeal for you?
I'm not endorsing either. And actually,
have they asked you?
No, they haven't actually. And a large part of the reason that I joined the Liberal Democrats, other than the fact that obviously I'm a social democrat with liberal values, which are Liberal Democrat values, was because of Vince Cable, who I got to know very well when I was shadowing him in opposition. I was quite critical at the time of many of the things
you were. And don't worry. I've got all that here. Don't you worry.
He's a friend of I'm sure you have. Yeah. I'm sure. I'm waiting for the tweets to be brought up.
Well, we got one here, but this is the 3rd political party in, as I say, almost as many months. Yeah. Your constituents must be a little bit confused by all this. They've got proper jobs. It's quite hard for them to keep track with which party you're in. Isn't it time to give them a people's vote?
Well, actually, my constituency scored the highest Remain vote in the country in the 2016 referendum. And actually, I think...
They didn't vote for you just for Remain, did they? They voted for you because you were Labour.
Hang on just a minute, if I just finished the thought, which is this, that I actually think that the way that the electorate is voting in elections and thinks about politics is less of a left-right thing. I think it is more of an open-close thing. Now, my constituents are very open-minded. They're very internationalist. And
so a large part give them the vote?
Well...
they're smart and open-minded enough. in a by-election, work out which party you're with and decide if they want to vote for you.
The main reason that people voted for me in Streatham is because of my position on Brexit. And when you can compare my performance in the last general election to the performance of Kate Hoey, for example, next door...
Well, let's look at what you said.
I got 15% more than
look what you said in April 2017 in this tweet. Whatever common ground we may have with the Lib Dems and some Tories on Brexit, I cannot forgive them what they've done to my area. Well, you can't forgive them, but you joined them.
And let me explain why, because the Liberal Democrats have changed since then. In every single one of the budgets since 2015, they have voted against the Tory budgets. They stood on a 2017 anti-austerity manifesto and voted in accordance with that manifesto since. For example, arguing for the reversal of cuts to housing benefit and universal credit. And if your concern is to end austerity, as it is mine, the best way of doing that is to ensure that we stay in the European Union. You cannot leave the European Union and end austerity.
Right. And I know that's
your view. What the two main parties are seeking to do.
Have you forgiven them?
I wouldn't quite put it like that. It's not something that I think I wouldn't use that language. But what I would say,
did then.
What I would say is that things have changed, and there are lots of things that people's political parties do that they might think is unforgivable. A lot of people in the Labour Party think the Iraq War was unforgivable, but they're still in the Labour Party. But my point is, if the Liberal Democrats had the same fiscal position as they did in 2010, 2015, things would be very different. But they've changed.
All right. Anne Widdecombe, do you have some sympathy with Chuka Umunna's position, given that you've changed parties too?
Well, I changed once. I haven't changed twice in a matter of months.
Oh, give it time.
No, that won't happen.
Early days.
That won't happen.
Really?
And I never did understand why Chuka and indeed the other MPs joined this extraordinary party called Change UK in the first place, because it never did differ from the Lib Dems, did it?
No, well, I explained that to you. I mean, I thought that the millions of politically homeless people in the centre ground of British politics, I thought they wanted a new party. As it turns out, the clear message that we got, both from the results but also what people were telling us during the local elections and the European elections, that they didn't want a new party, but they wanted the centre ground, the pro-European progressive centre ground, to work much more closely together. My view is you either ignore that, you will take heed of the message that people are giving you.
You're a bit of a slow learner. Most of us realised that at the time.
Well, I'm just being honest. I think a lot of people...
I'm glad you've caught up.
A lot of people, actually, in and around the Liberal Democrats, also were questioning whether they would be the main centre-ground party in the next general election.
It's very clear that they will be now.
Brexit
business has changed everything. Other than,
I think so.
Other than a common desire to get out of the EU, even with no deal, if that's what it takes.
Absolutely.
What else do you have in common with your fellow MEPs in Brussels and the Brexit Party?
First of all, as you rightly say, our aim, our main aim...
Right. So I've given you that.
No, just a minute, I'm going to finish. Our main aim is to leave the EU, and this is where I wanted to finish, cleanly and decisively, and on WTO terms, and then we can negotiate a trade deal after that. Now, that was a distinctive position, and I'm very glad that when we went into the European elections, that was the only position we did have, because there was no other reason for anybody to vote for us, and they voted in droves, and we topped the polls. So I would say...
And I know all that.
If you're talking
what I'm saying is, what else do you have in common?
New parties can't succeed. Our new party has succeeded big time.
So let me try and see if I can get...
Sure.
If I can succeed in getting you to answer the question.
Yes.
Which is, what else do you have in common?
What else we have in common is that we want democratic politics in this country, and at this moment...
everybody wants that.
No, they don't, actually. At this moment, Andrew, there is a major policy meeting going on to produce the policies that we will have to have, and which we acknowledge we're going to have, for a general election. It's going on now.
All right. Let's go to Committee Room 12. That's where all the action is. We can just see a picture of it. Not a lot to see. There it was. I now can see that in my sleep. I've seen it so often, the woodwork and the expensive wallpaper. That's where the announcement will be made, probably just after 1 o'clock, to winnow down the Tory leadership hopefuls to 3. And then by 6 o'clock this evening, they'll be down to 2, and off they'll go to hustings in the country. While we wait for that result, let's turn briefly to Labour. The Shadow Cabinet met yesterday to decide whether to back a wholehearted Remain position, and it wasn't entirely conclusive. There's a surprise. Let's speak to Michael Chesham. He's a Labour activist who wants the party to back Remain. Are you worried that Jeremy Corbyn is now stringing you along on this issue?
I don't think it's that Jeremy Corbyn's stringing us along. I think it was disappointing that the Shadow Cabinet didn't move the position more clearly on Wednesday. I think it's likely to move next week. It's kind of inevitable that Labour will end up being an anti-Brexit party. Look, we're organising a wave of motions to Labour Party conference in September, and we're going to deliver a huge mandate there for a clear anti-Brexit position, for an unequivocal backing of freedom of movement, and for a radical programme to sort of transform Europe. So really, it's delaying the inevitable for Labour to string this out any longer.
And I understand, you know, it looks like the tide is with you in the Labour Party on this. More people coming round to your point of view. But as you've said, you're not there yet. So who is the roadblock to reform?
Well, look, I think it's pretty clear that the overwhelming majority of Labour members want the party to move.
No, we know that. I'm asking you, who's holding that up? If it's not Jeremy Corbyn, who's holding it up?
Well, look, I think the honest answer is that it's very difficult to actually tell, because the people who are holding it up are, to be frank, not that accountable. It's very clear that John McDonnell, Diane Abbott, Keir Starmer, Emily Thornberry, even Jeremy himself, not necessarily an enthusiast for a fresh public vote, but certainly willing to go there.
So who are the people holding it up then? If you know them, who are they?
Well, look, I don't want to get into a name calling. Look, the Labour Party is going to end up
name calling. I'm simply asking you who you think you're on the wave of an inevitable trend. There are people holding it up. It hasn't happened yet. I'm asking you, who are they, if not Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, look, I think there are senior unelected people at the heart of the Labour machine. I think the Labour Party's got a problem. Has got a problem with machine politics.
Who are they?
And I think they need to.
All right, Chuka Umunna will throw out some names and see if you agree. Chuka, just name one.
Len McCluskey's
all right. Len McCluskey, is he holding it up?
Yeah, look, I think it's a real shame. Look, I'm a member of Unite.
But is he holding it up?
Yeah, look, I think the role that Len McCluskey's played in this has been
all
a
right,
problem.
so we got Len McCluskey, a bit like blood out of stone here. What about Seamus Milne, the head of Mr. Corbyn's office?
I'm sorry. No, this isn't blood out of a stone. This is about me wanting to talk about the actual politics of the situation.
Yeah, but I'm trying to work out who's stopping you.
Well, fine, and I think you can ask whoever you want to give that answer. The important thing here is the politics of the situation. We're about to enter a period in which a conservative, a hard right-wing conservative prime minister is going to try to drag us out of the EU without a deal or on a hard deal basis, with no mandate, and we have to resist that, and Labour has to resist that. That's the political discussion that we need to be having here.
And what you want in response to that, as I understand, I think you're on the record, is a summer of mass occupations, disruptive protests, and wildcat strike action. Is that right?
Well, yeah. Look, I think we are now in a position where a hard deal Brexit. We need to be clear about what a hard deal or a no deal Brexit means.
No, we know what that is. I'm asking you what your actions are going to be. Do you think that wildcat strike action?
I'm really more than happy to get to it.
Or mass occupation?
Yes, you're right.
You know
that I'm on the record, so why are you interrupting me?
Do you think that's a way to win hearts and minds?
Well, I mean, actually, there is a long tradition in Britain of protest, of disruptive, of quite radical protest. When governments take decisions in a completely unaccountable way, we're about to enter a period where we're going to get an extreme right-wing Tory Prime Minister trying to wreck communities and open up the NHS to privatisation via trade deals with Trump's America, with almost no, in fact, no popular mandate. Under those circumstances, I think people have the right to take civil disobedience and to take all non-violent action that they can to attempt to disrupt that extreme agenda.
I understand the logic of your case and what you plan to do or hope to do. Who's going to organise these mass occupations and wildcat strike action?
Well, look, I think we've got a really interesting situation. We've had 1 million people march against Brexit. We've had hundreds of thousands of people march against Trump. We've got a very active anti-Brexit movement. We've also just had Extinction Rebellion take place. I think all of the ingredients for a big summer or a big wave of a serious direct action protest movement are there. They need to be brought together, and it's up to the leadership of the Brexit movement, of the anti-Brexit movement, but also but also of the Labour movement to start to put these pieces together and show some serious concerted opposition.
The big anti-Brexit march in London. which was in a very British tradition of a massive, peaceful march, which was all planned and didn't disrupt anything. And I watched that on television and looked at the faces and the people. Do you think these are the people who will take wildcat strike action?
I think it's certainly something that we should be willing to consider. Look, I think that if you've got a situation where you're in a situation where a government is going to wreck communities, wreck the future of the country and wreck public services with no mandate, I think it's absolutely legitimate to have a conversation about where the boundaries of dissent end. And the boundaries of dissent don't just end at passive A to B marches. We've got a long history of passive A to B marches.
Okay.
They have their role in protest movements. But actually, I think, yes, we've got to be willing to look towards more radical measures.
Okay. Well,
if you've got an opposite side, the Tory party, bent on a pretty hardcore...
We need to leave it there. Michael Chesham, thanks for that. Let us know if there are going to be any strikes, because lots of people are going off with their families on holiday, and they would probably like to know if you're going to disrupt their planes. But thank you for joining us, and we'll see if we are in for a summer of discontent. We're now joined by Simon Hoare. He is a Sajid Javid supporter. Welcome to the programme. You've got the Sajid Javid badge.
I sleep in it, Andrew.
What you do in the privacy of your own attic is really none of our business. So, it's a race now between Mr Hunt and Mr Gove. Mr Javid will be leaving this race in about 4 minutes' time, correct?
I don't know that. I hope not.
I know you hope not, but he will be.
Well, I don't know. Let's wait and see what
but if he
Cheryl
does,
Gillen or Charles Walker announces.
If he does.
We have fought a very positive campaign. I think it has picked up momentum. Remember, just a few weeks ago, lots of colleagues were saying that Saj didn't have the support to even get onto the ballot, and here we are down into round 4 in the last 4. Anything can happen. I'm hopeful.
I know you're hopeful.
You have to be an optimist in this game.
If though the likely happens, and look, we love surprises. You may be right,
We do.
I may be wrong. But if I'm right, who will you back in the ballot this afternoon?
Well, we've only got a few moments to wait, Andrew. Let's just wait and see what the result is. I may this afternoon be going into room 14, which is what I hope to be doing, to vote for Sajid Javid.
Right, but once he's knocked out in now about 3 minutes, will you tell us after that?
See, you're countering my optimism with your pessimism.
No, I'm just really teasing you to pass the
You're
time.
teasing me. I will take that decision
Liz,
if I have
you've
to.
been close up front in this. If Mr Javid is knocked out, do his votes go on block somewhere, or do they go all over the place?
I think they could potentially go all over the place, but I think the interesting thing will be there has been some discussion of the fact that Boris Johnson, if he is up to some skullduggery, could be passing votes to Sajid Javid to get rid of Michael Gove at this stage. So that would be a really interesting thing to see if
Does that sort of thing happen?
I mean, who knows? People tell me it doesn't, but I think the evidence is to the contrary. But I have to say that Sajid has run a very good campaign, and he's put himself in a really good position if he does go out in the next few minutes. He's been touted around at the moment for Chancellor. He set out some really good, interesting policy proposals for rebalancing the UK economy. And so I think he's done really well throughout the campaign.
OK. We are almost coming up to 1 o'clock. We say goodbye to viewers watching on BBC Two. BBC Two is now going to be showing the tennis at Queen's. But if you want to continue with the Tory leadership race and find out the next result, continue to watch us on the BBC News channel.
Just test it's working, that. Ah! Yeah, it's working, Martin. Go! I'm not...
As one, so I think they probably will shatter. Also, Saj, in the previous round, when he was in the BBC debate, he went out of his way to appeal to kind of former Dominic Raab supporters and back up Boris Johnson on the 31st of October question, that obviously won't play as well with former Rory Stewart supporters. But that means that his base is now a mix of different things.
I mean, if he wants to be Chancellor, doesn't he back Mr Johnson?
Well, I think the point that's just been made is right, that no candidate takes all of their supporters with them and sort of lands them in a new
They don't
basket.
have what the Americans call coattails.
They don't have coattails. People will take a decision, and people will... and I think the one thing which is always forgotten on this is, because it's the sort of slightly human side of a leadership election, and that is the human emotional capital that gets invested in support of a candidate that you are backing. You like them, you get on with them, you get to know them even better as the campaign goes on. I'm not going to say it's like a bereavement. That would be overstating it. But there is... I've been talking to colleagues who have been working their socks off for candidates who have fallen at early offences. They do get upset, and they do need a little bit of time just to gather their thoughts, think about things, because the person that they've vested all of their hope and support in has disappeared from the contest. And it's that sort of slightly human nature of politics which often, I think, gets slightly overlooked.
Well, your colleagues in the Conservative backbenches of the Parliamentary Party are filling up Committee Room 12. I think the result next time will be Committee Room 14. They're switching committee rooms, is that right, for the next vote?
I think so, yes.
So I just want to make sure you get to the right room. So BBC is here to help.
Somebody can
on
point
these matters. It's beginning to fill up. We're beginning to get used to this site. And the officers of the 1922 committee will come on stage shortly. We're told we'll get the result at about 1:05. And would it come as a former Conservative, still somebody with sort of Conservative leanings, if I can put it that way, with a small... See, has this contest been a plus or a minus for the Conservative Party?
Oh, I think it's been a huge minus to begin with. 12 candidates. I mean, for heaven's sake, it looked bonkers. It was bonkers. I think, however, as you get down towards the last few, and I don't just mean the last two. I mean, I think we're now in more sensible territory. Then I think it becomes somewhat more interesting. But I mean, the thing the Conservative Party had to do, frankly, was to change its leader. But as far as I'm concerned, none of them are actually offering the sort of guarantees that we want to see on Brexit. And if they don't deliver Brexit, then what then?
Well, Anne, at least we're going through a democratic process. I actually think having a large field is interesting. It shows that there are lots of people who want to do the job, who have views and opinions to contribute. I'm not aware of Mr Farage putting himself through any particularly challenging husting to effectively become...
Like we've just topped the polls in the Euro elections. Like we've just topped the polls. Like we're ahead in opinion polls for YouGov.
To effectively become host of his own lunch party.
I think that is just about the most ridiculous thing. We've had 8 weeks as a party. We have, in that time, topped the polls. We have spoken.
We have any members.
Yes,
we have spoken.
It's not a party. It's a club.
I can understand that in fairness, because Nigel, as we both know, Nigel Farage had endless frustrations with UKIP. I think he once described the UKIP NEC as people who come with sandwiches in rucksacks to kind of make.
You're all in denial. We're topping the polls.
I completely recognise you're topping the polls.
In denial, and that's what you can't face. And as for this being a democratic
it's been a huge success for you.
This is just the MPs, and not a very large number of them at that rate. If you really wanted a democratic process, and I used to say this when I was in the Conservative Party, so I'm not being clever in retrospect, you would actually reverse the order, and you'd have the party in the country decide, whittling it down to 2 or 3, and then the MPs deciding with their knowledge of those individuals.
Don't give them any ideas. We might have to go through the whole process again on this. I mean,
long enough as it is.
The point is that they have made it very difficult for whoever becomes your next leader to call a general election without Brexit being resolved. They'll take you to the cleaners if you go to the country without Brexit being resolved.
Andrew, you are absolutely right. This is part of the reason why I wasn't in favour of having a leadership contest in the first instance. It doesn't change the parliamentary arithmetic. Hang on. It doesn't change the parliamentary arithmetic. There isn't a sort of silver bullet that suddenly can be found somewhere in the arsenal. We wouldn't be, in a general election scenario, handing over to somebody who understands the sort of international rules-based way of doing politics. Mr Corbyn, we know, is a left-wing firebrand. We're going to see summers of discontent and heaven knows what else. So the risk of that to the country, the economy, to jobs and to prosperity is too risky to play with. So whoever wins at the end of this process, whether it's front-ended or back-ended, is going to find it a challenge. It is going to be difficult, and anybody who reports that it's going to be not is living living in Cloud.
We need to say goodbye to Anne Widdecombe and Chuka Umbuna. I'm told that you've had too much fun and that you now need to leave. And we're sorry about that, but we'll keep our word and let you go at this time. You're going to stay with us. Our journalist is still here as well. What have you made? Do you believe that it's been a healthy or unhealthy process? Hold that thought, because you know what's happened? There they are in the room. Suddenly Chuka Umbuna and Anne Widdecombe want to stay as they watch you. Here we go. Committee room 12.
The 1922 committee, Charles Walker and I, as returning officers for the election of a leader for the Conservative and Unionist Party, can now declare the results of the fourth ballot. The total number of votes cast in today's ballot were 313. The total number of spoilt ballot papers were 2. We've scored a perfect record. The total number of votes given to each candidate in alphabetical order were as follows. Michael Gove, 61. Jeremy Hunt, 59. Sajid Javid, 34. Boris Johnson, 157. The following candidates are now eligible to continue on to the next ballot, which will take place this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. in Committee Room 14. Michael Gove, Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson. Thank you very much indeed.
And that was Cheryl Gillen there of the Conservative 1922 committee giving the result of the latest ballot for the leadership. Boris Johnson has added to his votes and got 157. He's way ahead in that. The interest here is for second position. And Michael Gove, for the first time in this Conservative leadership race, has moved into second position with 61 votes, followed by Jeremy Hunt on 59. Sajid Javid got 34, not a big improvement on where he was in the last ballot. He now drops out. 3 candidates this afternoon will go forward to the next ballot: Boris Johnson, Michael Gove and Jeremy Hunt. And which one, Mr Johnson clearly going through to the final round and the hustings among the party members. The battle now on for Sajid Javid's 34 votes to see where they go. Does Mr Gove hold on to his lead for the first time and be the man that goes forward to the knockout round? Or does Mr Hunt recapture that pole position to be the Conservative that will take on Boris Johnson? Mark Wallace, give me your reaction to the result.
3 really important things to note up front there. Firstly, Boris Johnson won an outright majority of the votes cast.
With 157?
157 of 313 votes cast. And so in that sense...
But only 2 spoiled, so
311. So
311, so he's got more.
Yeah, indeed, he won a majority overall. That in itself, I think, is quite a clear message, quite a kind of restatement of their dominance. Michael Gove, as we suggested earlier, has just snuck into second place, mirroring our own survey on Conservative Home of Tory members who put him in, admittedly distant, second place this morning. And of course, thirdly, now this is Sajid Javid's really big moment. If he does have any sway, what sway he has may be limited over his now former supporters, now whoever gets into the second round could end up owing him for that, for having done that. So a big question for him.
OK. Your reaction?
Yeah.
Interesting result.
Really interesting.
With Mr Gove moving into second position.
It is, especially because Michael Gove, I think, was a big favourite coming into the leadership contest and hasn't had a very good leadership contest, partly because of the revelations that came out about him, but also the way that he's dealt with it. He's sort of lost a bit of confidence. I think there was a feeling that he could be, because with the membership, he's the only sort of Brexit backing, pure Brexit candidate in that sense, that he was the Stop Boris candidate. He hasn't been in second place yet, and now he is. And I think that the Boris Johnson team will actually be worried about that. I think he's
the one they don't want.
He's the one they don't want. Yeah, and it looks like it looks to me from that result like if they have been trying to do any sort of tactical voting, it hasn't happened. So it's going to be really interesting this afternoon. If it ends up being Hunt in second place, I think it's going to be quite boring, if I'm honest, because the membership.
Don't tell me that. We've got a month of it.
But from the
it's going to be great.
But from the perspective of Tory members, the one thing they definitely don't want is they don't want really intense, personalised blue on blue. And it was definitely the case that some members were a bit worried last week when Michael Gove really started to personalise it in the Q&A after his launch against Boris Johnson. I'm not sure there'd be a huge appetite for 3 weeks of that.
But I think Mr Gove, if it is he, Mr Gove will be also playing for position. He will know he probably cannot beat Mr Johnson unless there's a huge upset. And therefore, he will not want to make it too personal in a way that counts him out from being Chancellor or Foreign Secretary or whatever. So it could be a muffled contest. I mean, people like me will do our best to make it bare-knuckled, but it could be muffled. Now, 10 minutes ago or 12 minutes ago, when I told you that Sajid Javid was going to fall out, what bit of that didn't you understand?
Well, I didn't understand your pessimism triumphing over my optimism, Andrew, but you were right to make that prediction. I'm obviously disappointed. I'm slightly sad to see Saj fall out of the contest, but actually immensely proud of how he's conducted himself. The broad base of support that he's managed to build both in the parliamentary party and the party in the country, and the interest in his ideas. We will now go on. I think we won't all sort of follow and join another caravan. People will break for different candidates, and that's going to be quite interesting to see. But if you were going to ask me, which maybe you weren't, do I regret backing him? Absolutely
No, I wasn't going to.
He is a first-class candidate with a big future in the Tory party.
I am going to ask you a question, but it wasn't going to be that one. But now that I've thought of it, it might be. Let me just let's show the result again, just for people who are coming in, maybe just started their lunch there. Let's just see it again. So Boris Johnson now getting, what's it called, Mark? A plurality, a majority. He's got a majority.
He's got an outright majority, 157
of 157 votes there. As has always been the case, clearly going through to the party membership in the country part when it goes down to 2. The surprise there is, I think we've got the names right. I think we're now calling Michael Gove Jeremy Hunt, whereas he's actually Michael Gove.
I'm not sure who's going to see.
We've got the picture right, but the name wrong. It is confusing, you know. But you didn't get me out there. That was the producer. That was the producer trying to catch me out there, you know. But oh no, I know Michael Gove when I see him.
It's almost as if they're interchangeable.
60. Well, you may say that. Mr. Hunt now in third place. He's been in second for the race, now in 59. Sajid Javid, as we were saying, down to 34. You've been working in the campaign. You were pretty close to him. You've helped him. Do you have any indication where Mr. Javid himself will go now with the 3 remaining candidates?
No.
You don't?
No.
And what about his support, the 34 people who voted for him? We've established, I think you're all agreed, that that is not a block of 34 that can be moved on to the Hunt column or the Gove column or the Johnson column. But did you have any sense of how they may split?
No, in all honesty, and I have to say, you know, find me a Bible, I'll put my hand on it. I have no idea because we haven't discussed it. We have been focused on trying to get through the rounds, trying to make the case, trying to be positive, trying to keep all of us focused on that ultimate objective, which is to unite and bind a fairly divided parliamentary Conservative Party at the end of this process, because this process, as long as it is, has to come to an end. So we haven't had that. Now, that might be naivety, I don't know, but we haven't had it.
I understand. We can go now to Penny Mordaunt in the Commons. There she is. Welcome to the programme, to Politics Live. Penny
Hello, hi.
Mordaunt, supporter of Jeremy Hunt in this leadership race. You must be disappointed that he's now relegated to third place.
Well, I'm sorry that we had a couple of spoilt ballot papers in there. I don't know which of my colleagues did that. But he's reached this stage, and we're glad that he's still in the race. And I think it's incredibly important that we now focus on which 2 candidates are going to make the best final. And that doesn't mean necessarily entertainment for journalists. It means people that are actually going to focus on the issues, the policies, and set out a vision and direction for the party. And I'm supporting Jeremy Hunt because I think he's the guy to do that, and he should be in the final.
But why is there no momentum behind his campaign? Indeed, he's fallen back. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think he's been steady. He's been setting out a very clear vision, not just on how he intends to get Brexit done and done well for the country, but also on a whole variety of other issues that the public really care about. I think we've seen a lot of tactical voting in previous rounds, but now, just as the first round was, now you're actually going to see people telling the truth in their votes. I think you're going to be seeing people voting for the people they want to see in the final. That's what I hope is going to happen. And I think we should put the Brexit Remain debate behind us, and we should pick the two candidates who are going to make the best prime ministers. And that's what we should be doing. We should remember it's not about us and our party, it's about the next prime minister too.
Mr. Hunt has said that the Tories must select a leader that the EU will deal with. Indicating indeed that the EU would not deal with Boris Johnson. Do you agree with that?
Well, I can't read the minds of European leaders, but what I do think is important is that we put someone forward who is going to be able to get some movement on the deal. Now, everyone has said that's impossible. I don't think it is impossible from conversations I've had with European counterparts, people from the Commission. I think what Jeremy brings to that is he knows those people well. He's not set out on this course of action without having a sense of what is achievable, and that's why I'm backing his campaign. Boris will have his own style, and he's been Foreign Secretary too. So let's see. But my confidence is behind
Brussels.
Jeremy Hunt.
Do you agree with your candidate that Brussels will not deal with Boris Johnson?
Well, I think that they have been quite disparaging, but actually my view is that we need to put forward the best person to get Brexit not just over the line, but actually deliver it well.
I appreciate that, but it's not my question. Let me try for a third time. Do you agree with your candidate that Brussels will not deal with Boris Johnson?
I think we stand a better chance with Jeremy Hunt. I'm not going to be disparaging to other candidates. I know you're tempting me to do that, but that's not my style. But I think we need to give Brussels the best person to deliver Brexit, and that's Jeremy Hunt.
But in a sense, your candidate, if he's right, is effectively giving Brussels a veto over who our next Prime Minister should be.
No, he's not.
He said that they must select a leader that the EU will deal with.
No.
And indicated they wouldn't deal with Mr. Johnson. So he's effectively giving Brussels a veto.
Whoever we select, Andrew, I think the party and I hope the nation will get behind that person. Brussels will have to deal with whoever we send.
So Mr. Hunt is wrong.
What I think is critical is that we send them the best person to get the best deal for Britain, and that's Jeremy Hunt.
Those who want Mr. Johnson to be challenged seriously in the hustings want him for his feet to be held to the fire, even if they believe he can't be beaten, but they want him to go through a tough contest. They believe Mr. Gove is much more the man to do that than your man. What do you say to that?
Well, I don't accept that. I think Michael has many gifts. He's a great orator. He can tell great jokes and deliver good lines. But actually, I think what we need is, not that Michael's not, but I think Jeremy's strengths are his authenticity, his vision, his clarity, his empathy and compassion, dealing with some very difficult issues that he has done in previous briefs that he's held. I think that is the material of a good Prime Minister. And that is what we're selecting, after all. It's not just a leader of a party. It is the Prime Minister in a few weeks' time. I'm supporting him because of that, because I think he's the most credible candidate, the candidate with the most experience, and the candidate most likely to get us out of this terrible situation that we as a party and a country are in, and get us what we need for a bright future.
Do you have hopes of getting the bulk? Let's assume, though it hasn't always happened, that those who voted this morning vote in the same numbers for Mr. Johnson, Mr. Gove and Mr. Hunt, leaving the 34 votes of Mr. Javid now up for grabs. Do you have hopes, have you had indications that Mr. Hunt can get enough of those to get him into second position?
I think he can get into the final. He's been the strongest performer throughout previous rounds, and it will come down to, as you say, Sajid's votes, his supporter base. I think that that will split a number of ways, and people have been canvassing those individuals, but you can't tell until the votes are in. So for us here in Westminster, it's going to be a very exciting afternoon. I wish all candidates well, and I hope we can put through the two best people for a good contest and to make a good Prime Minister at the end of it.
Will your message to Conservative MPs this afternoon be that a Mr Johnson, Mr Gove final round risks ripping the party apart? Is that a concern?
Well, I think that one of the things that we should be looking to secure throughout this contest is how do we bring the party together. With the governing party, we have to come together to do a good job for our constituents and the people across the country. So absolutely, I think that should be at the forefront of our minds. I think candidates will conduct themselves well. I think people were expecting a lot more fisticuffs throughout the contest than has actually happened. But we've got to carry on that spirit into the final round. That is Jeremy Hunt's style, and I hope that other candidates also do that.
But Mr Hunt voted for Remain in the referendum. He's accepted the results since. I'm not calling that into doubt, but he did vote for Remain. What chance is there that somebody who voted for Remain could win with a party membership that thinks Brexit more important than the integrity of the United Kingdom?
Well, I don't think that's the case with Jeremy Hunt. What I do think is important, and in the last leadership contest, I did support a Brexiteer, not just because I thought that person should be capable of delivering Brexit, but also because I felt that they would be able to reach over to the other half of the nation that voted Remain. They wouldn't have to talk about a red, white and blue Brexit. They'd be able to use softer language. They'd be able to reach out. I think we're past that now. The difference in politics is not between those that voted to leave or voted to remain. The difference is between those that accept the result of the referendum and those that don't. Throughout my entire time in Cabinet, Jeremy Hunt has been absolutely resolute.
I understand
on that issue.
But my point to you really was that is it not an uphill struggle for Mr Hunt, should he get into the final two, to be dealing with a membership that has perhaps lost its marbles, that thinks Brexit more important than the integrity of the United Kingdom? I mean, your party is called the Conservative and Unionist Party.
It is.
What's happening to your membership?
Well, I
that
think
Brexit is more important than the UK.
No. Well,
do you agree with that?
No, I don't agree with your assertion. My evidence for that, I did some live polling of a very large chunk of our party a couple of weeks ago on these precise issues. And we're very much the Unionist Party as well as Conservatives. And we're looking at ways that we can strengthen.
That's not what the YouGov poll showed. The YouGov poll was quite clear that your membership was prepared to go for Brexit even if it broke up the United Kingdom.
I would take polls with a very big pinch of salt. What I know, as someone that's been in this party for many years, who talks to people length and breadth of the country from the four nations of the United Kingdom, that we in the Conservative Party believe in the Union. We want to keep the Union strong. That's why we have struggled so much in order to find a way through to deliver Brexit. It was at the forefront of our minds in those deliberations as we worked out what to do. So I think the Union is safe in our hands. But what we must do is find a way through this. And it is complex, and we need someone who is a serious candidate who's going to be able to do that. And that's why I'm supporting Hunt. And I hope we have a final with him in it.
All right, Penny Mordaunt, we'll let you go. You've got
Thanks,
34 Sajid Javid votes to try and rustle up between now and voting later this afternoon. And we thank you for appearing on Politics Live with us. We're now joined by George Eustice, supporter of Michael Gove. I think I'm right in saying. Yep. You must be happy that he, for the first time now, he's in second position.
Yeah, this is a very good result for us. We've been closing the gap on Jeremy Hunt very slowly, but very surely in every round. And this is a big breakthrough to go into second place. And I think we're well placed.
Will he hold it? Do you think he'll hold it?
I think we will now, but we've got a lot of work to do. Everyone's going to be working on those Sajid Javid supporters. I think we're well placed. We're certainly not home and dry, because obviously it's still very close with 2 votes in it.
How solid do you believe these, I think it's 61 votes, that Mr Gove got in this round, can he bank that 61 for the next round and then try to add to it? Or are we in a fluid situation that these votes could still move around in the next ballot?
Well, look, I've seen the Daily Telegraph story today suggesting that, you know, Boris Johnson might have been lending votes to Jeremy Hunt and so on. It looks like that sort of tactics was exaggerated or not followed through on in the end. But for me, Michael Gove has been building in every single round on this, so he's keeping all of his support.
Do you think momentum is now with him?
Absolutely, yes.
Let me just show you what Heather Stewart of The Guardian has tweeted. She says it's clear what Hunt's argument is in the 2 remaining hours before voting opens for the next round. I think voting opens at 3 o'clock this afternoon.
That's right.
Is that right? If you want a match-fit world leader, I guess this is Jeremy Hunt she's talking about, who can beat Mr Johnson and avoid the psychodrama of Boris versus Gove, support Hunt. And she gets that from a campaign source of Mr Hunt. Putting aside the world leader issue, which is an interesting claim, she's referring there, or the source is referring to, of course, the great psychodrama that happened after the referendum, when it was widely thought Mr Gove knifed Mr Johnson in the back. Does that worry you? Will that be good for the Conservative Party?
Yes, it will, and I'll explain why. That event that obviously caused tension between them at the time, it's 3 years ago. Since then, they worked in cabinet together. They actually worked together on a number of issues.
They've been in cabinet
together. They've been in cabinet, but worked together in a very close way. And they'd put that event behind them at the time. And, you know, I worked on the 2005 election, where there was actually, frankly, quite a bit of tension at the end of the parliamentary rounds between David Davis and David Cameron. And you know what? When they went out on that hustings circuit right around the country together debating, they actually came together and bonded and became closer at the end of it, and were then, whoever won, better placed to put the party back together. I think the same will happen on this, that Michael Gove and Boris Johnson on that hustings circuit will actually be part of a healing process for our party.
Well, in that case, if it is a Johnson-Gove runoff, will Mr Gove pull his punches?
He will be very clear about what he's going to do, what he stands for, as you do in any hustings.
But will he get personal? Will he say, which is what he seemed to imply the last time they had a bust-up, that Mr Johnson is unfit to be Prime Minister?
Look, Michael is one of the politest people in politics. He's got strong convictions, yes, he states them clearly, but he's going to play this well if he gets to the final.
Because he doesn't want to annoy just Mr Johnson so much that he doesn't get a job.
I actually just think that what the party should be given, in my view, is 2 committed Brexiteers, 2 people who campaign for Brexit. I don't think it's enough to have somebody who says they respect the result, even though they were a Remainer. We've tried that in Theresa May and it didn't work. But you'll have a choice between Boris Johnson, who's a big figure, big character, brings a lot of colour to politics, but probably does less on detail, and Michael Gove, who is a detail man and has a track record of delivery.
It has some colour too. He has the flourish.
He has some colour
as well. I don't.
They both have flourish.
Mr Johnson knows some details too.
Of course, but I think one has more than on the other.
Let's just stay with the prospect, not the likelihood, but the prospect of a Johnson-Gove playoff in the hustings. What would you make of that?
Well, I think the term a healing process is wildly optimistic, if you don't mind me saying so. I think the way that Heather is, you know, the source that Heather is talking about to say that it would end up being a kind of Gove-Johnson psychodrama is probably about right. We've seen Gove have a few little digs at Johnson during the debate, the BBC debate. We actually saw that. And I think that would happen more. And actually, don't discount the egos of, you know, Gove and Hunt. If they get, either of them get down to the final 2, they won't really, I don't think, be thinking about their next job. They'll both be thinking, I can be Prime Minister and this is my chance. And so, from my perspective, the psychodrama of Gove and Johnson, that's going to be really interesting to watch, but I don't think it's going to be a healing process.
What do you make of it?
There's obviously a risk there. It was a bit alarming, frankly, last week to hear the don't pull out kind of jibe.
Which was what Michael Gove said
towards Boris
Johnson. He was almost teasing Boris Johnson.
Yes, he said afterwards it wasn't intended in the sense it might have sounded, but it didn't.
Well, it was very clear how it was intended. I was at the launch. He was asked a very direct question: shouldn't you pull out now with all this bad weekend press you've had? He said absolutely not, and he reminded people that Boris Johnson pulled out of the contest in 2016.
Indeed, with a hefty dose of comic timing, I think it's fair to say. But I think people do, whoever gets to this, they do have to avoid this getting too personal. Conservatives believe in competition. We can't have a curtailed, cut short race. There's got to be a proper contest, but a contest that brings the best out of both sides.
Does it really have to be a month?
Well, I mean, that's how long they've set it. You can't change it now. I don't think you can go monkey.
Will we not be going round in circles?
It must be a month.
Has to be a month?
I think so. You have to give members a chance to scrutinise. You know, whenever, you know, last time we made a mess of electing Alida, let's frankly put it that way, because she wasn't tested. There was a whip operation to get her there, and then it never actually went to the member. She was never
you think she could have been, quote, rumbled if there had been a contest?
I think she would have been. I mean, the point was the first time she was actually tested was the Prime Minister in the general election, which was a catastrophe.
There's a little difficulty for Michael Gove here, of course, which is that some people still believe that it was kind of his fault that happened in the race. Boris Johnson blowing up in the race last time round, and that is something I think he struggled to shake off a bit. But the race will end sooner, in a way. This is a postal ballot. The votes will start landing on the 7th of July.
So when do the postal ballots go out? You're Conservative home, you know about.
They get sent out apparently on the 4th, and are expected.
4th of July.
Members have been advised to expect to get.
And do you expect that a lot of members, the moment they get the postal ballot, will say, right, I know I'm going to vote now?
I think a lot will. We see the poll lead that Boris Johnson has in our runoffs has been pretty consistent. Both candidates, alternative candidates, score about 26%. He scores around 60%. So some will probably wait because there are hustings that take place after the postal ballots land in some parts of the country. But a lot of people, I think...
But a lot of the hustings could take place after a lot of members have voted.
Indeed, yes.
Is it not a concern it wouldn't be a legitimate concern, indeed, that many Conservative MPs worried about a Johnson-Gove psychodrama will choose Mr Hunt? They believe that neither can beat Mr Johnson, so choose Mr Hunt, who's less likely to cause fireworks and embarrassment in any debate.
Well, if that's the case, they should just say, well, let's forget it and have a coronation again like we did with Theresa May. But I think that would be wrong. And they're wrong to think this will be a psychodrama. As I said, people have, they've dealt with this. They put this behind them when they worked in Cabinet together. And I actually think, just as with David Cameron and David Davis, on that hustings circuit, you would actually see them coming together. And whoever prevailed and won in the end, they'd be able to put the party back together with the support of the other.
Yeah, of course, it's a huge disadvantage as well for Boris Johnson, the month that we have to see the hustings play out, because, you know, his tactic throughout this campaign by his team has been whenever he opens his mouth, he says something stupid, so let's keep him quiet, and he's going to have to open his mouth a little bit during the next month.
But he's going to be doing it in front of that segment of the population, small segment of the population, that most adores him.
Yeah,
but people underestimate Conservative members. You know, they elected David Cameron in 2005 when everyone said they would just vote for David Davis. They're quite capable of discerning people's qualities, and they'll be looking for someone now who's got the ability to be Prime Minister at a very, very serious time for our country and navigate our way out of the EU. And I think that will, in the MB, Michael Gove, I think he can persuade them of that.
Let me continue on my theme for you to respond to. Kevin Schofield, the editor at Politics Home, source close to Jeremy Hunt. Maybe it's the same one that was talking to The Guardian. Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, are great candidates, but we've seen their personal psychodrama before. It's time to offer the country someone the EU will actually talk to. Now, that is part of what I was asking Penny Mordaunt about, this idea that Mr Hunt seems to be putting about that the EU will not talk to Boris Johnson, which seems to me to be the kind of thing you say in campaigns, but actually it would imply that Brussels had a veto on who you choose as the next Prime Minister.
Brussels will deal with who they we will elect our Prime
Brussels will deal with whoever the British system produces in that. But it's interesting that this psychodrama is coming back. I mean, this is what's going to play out in the next couple of hours, isn't it? Mr Hunt's people are going to be saying to Sajid Javid, people, come with us, you'll still get a debate, you'll get your month of hustings, but it won't be a bloodbath, and you risk that with Mr Gove.
Yeah. Well, what happens if we get into this leadership contest? Boris Johnson's been hiding in his shell so far, not come out to do the press gallery debate or anything else. What happens if he stumbles during the election, the contest? Members get cold feet. They're looking for an alternative. Then the only alternative they see is Jeremy Hunt, who they regard as a Remainer. We know that the membership this time wants a true Brexiteer, and we must have an alternative Brexiteer on the ticket, and that's Michael Gove. Otherwise, you'll be giving them a dreadful choice of somebody who they may get cold feet over and not think can do the job in Boris, but then a Remainer as the alternative.
Do you believe that this line coming out of the Hunt camp will have some traction among Conservative MPs who have yet to decide between Mr Gove and Mr Hunt?
Well, it's very acutely targeted, and I think they choose this for a reason. They're not dummies in terms of how they message. If you're somebody who was voting Sajid Javid today, not necessarily a Javid supporter all the way through, but somebody who's picked up in recent rounds, then perhaps you might be somebody who's a bit more interested in what you might see as a slightly more placid choice. I think this part of the interesting question about true Brexiteers is this just going to go back to a choice of the who you backed in the referendum, or really Boris Johnson will be in the final against two people, both of whom continued to stay in the cabinet after Chequers, which I think is probably a larger concern for the membership.
Final thought from you, Liz?
Well, I mean, I think this psychodrama line is interesting, but I do think we there'll be some people that decide that they do want maybe a more placid end to the campaign to make sure that the Tory party kind of stays unified. We have to remember as well that there are some people that want to see Boris have a hard time and they want to damage him and they're not his supporters, and I think those people will go to Gove.
Look at the crisis we're in. This is not a time for being placid, to be blunt. We've got a major problem in this country to sort out.
And in your heart of hearts, or in his heart of hearts, does Mr Gove seriously think he can beat Mr Johnson?
Yes, absolutely. And I believe that too, having backed David Cameron when he was the underdog.
We should leave it there. Thanks to all of my guests. You can follow the results on tonight's final ballot in the Conservative Leadership Contest on the BBC News channel. That will come around 6 o'clock, and I'll be on This Week Tonight with Michael Portillo, Alan Johnson, Wes Streeting, Richard Madley, many others at BBC One.
Well, that's your fucking lot for now. So we're back at 6 o'clock, I think it is. 6 bells. Well, there's not none next, apart from the fucking news, which is a bit boring. So, yeah. So, let's see. Do you reckon it's Gove or Hunt that's gonna get it then? I reckon Jeremy Hunt's gonna get it. But a lot of people like Gove, so I'm not too sure. Might have a runoff. Imagine they both tied for second place. Now that would be fucking hilarious. That's up like an MMA fight in the House of Commons or something. Now I'd pay to see that shit. It'd be weird if I had a TV license there. A little fucking MMA fighting in the House of Commons. Anyway, we will soon find out. So, I will be back around 10 to 6 local time in England. So if you're not in England, then whatever, make it up yourself. But yeah, be back at about 10 to 6. Some shit like that. I think it'll be on the news channel. It should be. Anyway, have a good day, people, and I see you later.